Hi, my name's Christine Penko, and I'd like to introduce my reading this evening by giving you just a little history about the place where I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, that place being Arleta, California. And it wasn't actually a city or a town, it was just a postal distinction that was created by a petition from the white residents living in the western portion of the community of Pacoima in the San Fernando Valley, who wanted to separate themselves from the majority African American population then living in the eastern portion of Pacoima. The whites who wanted this division worked at the time side by side with African Americans in the factory and construction jobs then available in that area. But their lives outside the factory rarely intersected. My poems this evening all take place in Arleta. The lower orders. What I remember clearly is the gutter running wild with muddy water and the rain pelting us as it still did in those long ago days in California, and our small hands, Susie's and mine, shivering, plucking fat earthworms from the rampage to deposit in our mason jar of witch's brew. Toothpaste, hand lotion, Listerine, and dead bodies of moths we'd gleefully beheaded on a sunny day, plucking them off the fire thorn, chasing them down on their final headless flight. We must have been 5, giddy with the hunt. If I pinch my thumb and forefinger, I still feel their dusty wings struggle of wriggling thorax. I don't know if anyone observed us or cared. Maybe it was the war, beheadings in the Pacific, bodies blown to bits in France, all of our fathers, their horror-filled heads, bloody hands, no room for pity of the lower orders. I wish I could say we were punished. I wish I could forget how we laughed. Telephone numbers. Once unforgettable, Empire 23244. Our black box, with its revolving numbers and letters, hung on the kitchen wall for anyone tall enough to reach and fast enough to sprint to before it stopped ringing. Dad often remarked, "The bastards got you comin' and goin'," meaning toll charges that laced the monthly bill. Long distance not to be undertaken except on national holidays when the box connected us with relatives we barely knew for a few awkward minutes of "hello, how are yous?" Still, once a child memorized her number, she was set free in the world to roam with the confidence she'd come to no harm as long as she held a dime in her pocket. This next poem takes its title from Fred Rogers' song, "It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood." When a child, I knew my small neighborhood, knew it deep. The Glocheskis, Schwartzlers, Lilashers, Mathenis, Sherlins, Ericksons, and Wickstroms, my Uncle John and my Grandma Malvina. I knew their children and the inside of their homes. I knew who bought a color television and whose cupboards were bare. I knew who left his Playboys on the coffee table. I knew my uncle gave his paycheck away in Vegas. I knew what kind of food they ate, mac and cheese or exotic avocado salad, fried pierogi, liver and onions. I heard their music, or the lack of it. The Sherlins record collection taught me every lyric of Lerner and Lowe, Rogers and Hammerstein. I knew their religions, Catholic, Lutheran, Mormon, and Jew. I knew which kids did well in school and who was the problem child. In the street, I knew who could swing a bat, kick a football, and played fair or didn't. I knew the alley and who set fires in the trash cans. I knew how hot the sidewalks got in summer and what the asphalt did to our skin when we fell off our bikes. I knew whose fathers fought in the war and whether they were Army or Navy. I knew whose mother was never without a broom in her hand and whose mother drank herself blotto on the sofa. As time passed, I knew secrets, terrible secrets. Who was cheating on their spouse? Who beat his crippled wife? Who molested his children? I would like not to remember these things. Most days, the mothers were depressed, the fathers angry, and the children some of both. The neighborhood was choked with whiteness. Grown-ups said awful things about each other when they thought no one but a child could hear. They called anyone who was different horrible names. There were few books. Furniture was covered in thick, sticky plastic. Mothers locked their children out of the house in the heat of the afternoon, telling them to go somewhere else to play. Teenage girls got pregnant, and neighbors gossiped with relish. Mr. Wickstrom, the Mormon, put the barrel of his gun into his mouth, pulled the trigger, blew out his teeth, yet somehow survived. I never liked him, but still, it was an awful thing to know. This next poem is actually my very first memory of a conversation about political figures, and it's about Ike Eisenhower, who was the president in the early 50s, and his opponent, Adlai Stevenson, who was widely known to be too intelligent for his own good. The World at Peace. In the kitchen of the pink stucco house in the San Fernando Valley, the headline reads, "Eisenhower wins second term." My mother, who always voted the man, not the party, is disappointed that Adlai Stevenson, the egghead, lost. I watch her shake the feeling off. She gives me a second helping of grits and eggs. I'm wearing a Mighty Mouse t-shirt with a red cape attached that arrived in exchange for cereal box tops. The sun pours in through the window as it does most days. I fluff my cape as I study black and white photos of Ike in the Green Sheet, our free local paper. Ike's round, balding head shines under a photographer's flash and looks a lot like an egg. I am almost 5 and confused. My mother explains they call Adlai, I think, what a funny name. They call him an egghead because he likes to read books. I like to read books. People don't like that, my mother says. Makes him sound too smart. Not a good trait in a leader. Here he comes to save the day, I sing in my head as my mother's mother, who sits silent, stiff-necked in the next room, makes a deep, gurgling sound, like our cat, Mittens, about to spit up something nasty. I scoop the last gooey mound of grits into my mouth, swallow hard. It means that Mighty Mouse is on his way. I hear the voices sing in my head just like the ones on TV. It was November 4th, 1956, the world at peace, and Ike still president. This next poem is about my very best childhood friend who lived directly across the street from us. I met her when I was 9. She's gone now, and I wrote this for her. Her name was Nancy. At 11, you had breasts. Just because I've never written about the death of my closest childhood friend doesn't mean we weren't children. Playing jacks can be a blood sport. 10-year-olds can have heated philosophical arguments about a pope's infallibility while slamming a plastic ball against a garage door. I was jealous you had breasts. 12-year-olds are capable of writing romance novels starring John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Your red polyester shaker knit sweater made it through junior high and high school. It was your only sweater. Some families run out of food before the end of the month, every month. You tasted the dog kibble before serving. We were both the eldest of 4, our only power, choosing which ones to exclude. My father taught me to dance the polka. Your father brought you ceramic frogs from the thrift store. You hated frogs. A mother can be jealous of a daughter who receives used ceramic frogs. I think it angered you that I played the piano. You were always angry. A child can feel sorry for herself because her mother is a drunk. Your mother never drank. My father played the accordion and yelled so loud he could be heard over at your house. Your father was a typesetter with ink on his hands. He was always in his garage. It wasn't until we weren't children anymore that you mentioned, in passing, he'd molested you and your sister and brother. Only the youngest was spared. I remember thinking it explained the frogs. So, across the alley in the other direction from our home, there was a woman named Jinx. Jinx. Across the alley, a witch named Jinx once lived, with her skinny husband and 4 dirty, skinny children. All of the grass around their house was dead and brown and crisp as a graveyard of crickets. Her chipped cement porch was forever filled with Pepsi empties that her dutiful, pale husband returned for the deposit. The witch's hair hung greasy and lank. Her youngest, still in diapers, always had a runny eye. They stayed closed up in the house most days. Once I crossed their threshold, but had to back out due to the stench of unwashed diapers trapped by unopened windows. The witch's other children roamed the neighborhood like polite coyotes, often showing up unexpectedly here and there at dinner time. Jinx never worked at anything, and how she occupied her days was a mystery. One day, I overheard my mother talking to some neighbor ladies. And what I can't understand, she was saying, what is so completely unfair is that her husband and kids adore her. How can that be? There was silence while the housewives considered the injustice of it. And I suppose I remember all of this because their faces looked bereft, as though that witch, Jinx, had cheated them of something. Then my mother answered her own question. Well, she said with a sigh, I guess she put a spell on them. So pretty early on, I thought about ways I could get out of Arleta. And there was a poet I loved very much, Edna St. Vincent Millay. And this is a poem from a quote from the poem she wrote when she was only 18 that she is actually most known for. The poem is Renaissance, and the quote is, all I could see from where I stood. Stunted trees, stucco tracks, a hose left to run the gutter, hot, dry winds, too much sun. When it rained, it flooded. Plenty to eat, TV dinners, cold cereal, spaghetti. Our housewife mothers, hens trapped in the coop, smoked and drank like in the movies. Our fathers, factory stiffs, bricklayers, yelled and hit and drank and refused to remember. These were the things that bounded me. I turned and looked another way. And my last poem is something written after Joy Harjo, who many of you know was not too long ago our National Poet Laureate. And this is after her poem, American Sunrise. It's called 3 Generations. 1. Carried on the wave of migration following World War II, we found ourselves unmoored from Ohio, adrift in LA. We labored at Lockheed, went to church on Sunday. Our children never went hungry. We kept as our secret what happened on that destroyer in the Pacific. We believed sunrise had finally arrived in our America. 2. We were sent to war in Vietnam or went to college or left in protest. Our families exploded like scattershot. Some imagined their success meant the country was headed toward justice for all and marched toward the mirage of sunrise in America. 3. Our families never reunite. Everyone works. We are raised by strangers. The rich get richer. Nothing trickles down. For some, the streets are their mattress. We stare at one another across a deep crevasse, many with guns loaded. The earth is on fire. We look to our leaders, speak to our elders, try to believe in a God who wouldn't allow the worst that could happen here today in America.